So the protests are still going on. Right now, thousands have continue to protest in Minneapolis. Look at the crowd. I want you to notice something else about that crowd. They're mostly white. Look at it for yourself. The larger community, the silent majority, agree there's a problem with cops. And they agree with it under the model that Black Lives Matter has been pushing it. Meaning, it's not a random protest with this kind of organic uprising. It is an organic uprising. But credit, in really large part, especially from the standpoint of the attention of media in regards to how they've been framing this, has been around this notion of Black Lives Matter. And larger society saw what happened and they said, you're right. Cops have a tendency to distribute force against blacks more often. Fair enough. Blacks have been saying it for years. We have proof of this in this particular video. We agree. And so you have whites and blacks out there together marching. This is wrong. This is an injustice. Now the question always is, how do you transform that advantage into a different material gain? That's always the question, especially in the standpoint of the political space. Occupy Wall Street, the 1% versus the 99%. It got lionized into society. So from that standpoint, a framing of this notion of this system is unfair. I mean, to put this in perspective, honestly, Jeff Bezos, $51 billion in the last 3 months. Jeff Zuckerberg, this is B. Zuckerberg, but Zuckerberg, 34.3 billion. Duh. And I don't think it's Jeff. I think it's Mark Zuckerberg. $34.3 billion. Last 3 months. Warren Buffett, 29.7 billion. Walton family, 26.3 million. Bill Gates, 25.5 billion. Koch brothers, 17.6 billion. You get my point. There are 40 million people unemployed. The unemployment rate is like 20%. And these guys are making a killing. Now, I don't think it's insane to ask yourself, is that fair? Now, some people will say they earned it, but I would make the point that, did they? To put this in perspective, consider for the moment, Bezos may have a great idea. Bezos can craft the most beautiful website that any man has ever known. And at the same time, Bezos will be penniless, because without somebody working in his stores, people coming into his shops, the society at large, making sure that the streets exist, making sure that there are cops, making sure that there's a fire department, just like that had to come out when one of the Amazon buildings caught on fire. The point I'm making to you is, these guys are nothing. They do not exist without a society around them and human beings just like you and me engaging in their commerce. The notion that Bezos will get $51 billion in 3 months, when that is just a flat fact truth, is obscene. You can't tell me that's fair. The only way he makes that money is to expropriate it from his workers, meaning he gets $51 billion by not paying his workers a decent salary. That is obscene. Nobody can say that this is a fair process when that happens and you have the world falling off its axis. Right now you have COVID-19, 100,000, 110,000 dead, over 2 million infected. I think you had 700 and some cases over the course of today. That number may go up. Yet they're still pushing the opening stores and everything else. That's obscene. Your government doesn't necessarily want to deal with making sure that people are whole until this blows over. They're more interested in the capitalistic system and making sure those people go back to work, even if that is in the midst of an infection. And those people end up dying. And we already know blacks are dying 3 to 1. I don't often talk about Candace Owens. I can't stand her. I find her opinion to be trash. And so I don't necessarily want to hear nails on a chalkboard. By the same token, I came across a video that she did that was appalling even by her trashy standards. And I'm going to cover that video. There are 3 parts in the video that I'm going to unfortunately subject you to. And I apologize for it, but I do think it should be discussed. She's an African American, and I'm going to give her the floor and let her explain her point. But I do kind of want to make the point of why I make the point that it's trash. It's utter trash. I don't know what forms into the brain of a human being where they say, I need to make this video, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender or anything else. But to say, I need to make this video, you have millions of people in the streets, millions of people in Sydney, millions of people in New Zealand, all of these, I'm sorry, maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands. London, France, if I'm not Amsterdam, you have people all around the world that rose up and flipped out all at once. Now, whatever you think their reasons for, I suspect they're supplanting whatever their angst and anger at their particular own governments, especially during this austerity, into this particular issue. It's the fastest thing moving. I'm jumping in. And I think something similar is taking place in the United States, that the angst and anger that people have against the political system is getting to some degree supplanted in this issue. But whatever the reasoning is, you have a large upswell of human beings. And the thing that comes into her brain in this moment is, I need to shit on Floyd. That's what I need to do. I need to shit on George Floyd. That got to get me out of bed in the morning. That's astonishing. Whoever is paying you to do this, whatever this, ad for shit eater that you decided to get, to some degree, I'm sorry for you. On another degree, I honestly think your opinion is utter trash. Let's have the conversation. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. It's Friday night. I'm pretty sure everybody else is doing something more interesting than I am. So I am here doing the news. Didn't feel like watching TV. My wife is upstairs. She's, I think, watching TV. This crossed my mind. I saw this, and this bothered me. Like I say, typically I don't necessarily listen to Candace Owens or watch her stuff, but she's part of the African American community nonetheless, and she has an opinion and a platform as being part of that particular community. I suspect she's somewhat of a pariah. There's the thing about black conservatives in the black community that's somewhat of a schism, so fair enough. Again, whatever that ad for shit eater that she accepted, I hope it pays well. Let's hear the first part of this clip where she goes into this notion that blacks are the only ones that elevate their criminals. Yeah, that's her angle. Don't get me wrong. She gives a perfunctory, yeah, you shouldn't have killed him, but that's couched within, he's a criminal, he's a thug. Why do we raise our criminals? And then she goes into this weird thing about blacks commit more murders. It's like, well, what the fuck are you talking? Let's hear make a point. I'm not going to preface it. Let's hear.
It means to say that not every black American is a criminal, not every black American is committing crimes, but we are unique in that we are the only people that fight and scream and demand support and justice for the people in our community that are up to no good. You would be hard pressed to find, a Jewish person who has spent 5 stints in prison, who commits a crime and dies while committing a crime, and that the Jewish people champion and demand justice for. You will be hard-pressed to find this in white America. You'll be hard-pressed to find this even in Latino America. If there is a person that spent multiple times in prison, you are not going to see a bunch of Latinos coming out demanding justice for this person, even if, and I want to be very clear, what I'm saying is not any defense for Derek Chauvin. I hope Derek Chauvin gets the justice that he deserves to be, implemented upon him, and that the family of George Floyd deserves justice for the way that he died. But I also am not going to accept the narrative that this is the best the Black community has to offer. For whatever reason, it has become fashionable over the last 5 or 6 years for us to turn criminals into heroes overnight. And it is.
You get a point. You get a point. The Black community is the only community that does this. She may not know this. She may not even pay attention to this because maybe she orients herself so fervently around a white narrative of things. But Christopher Columbus is taking a swim right now in Richmond, Virginia. And they might have fished him out, so fair enough. But he was a statue. They elevated him. He was a rapist and a mass murderer. Blacks are not the only one to elevate, what she said, the only one to elevate people who are up to no good. He was up to no good. There was no law, because laws are things that are created by human beings, and it's not necessarily a real cosmic thing. And after they started genociding, or let's say destroying and completely obliterating the Native American community, well, then they started creating laws where they can criminalize the activities that the Native Americans were doing. So I understand this breaking of the law stuff plagues you so, but Columbus was a mass murderer, mass rapist, and beyond Columbus, Confederate statues, terrorists that were literally trying to topple the U.S. government and fighting for the right to hold you and people like us as property, a commodity with legs that had no ability, that it had no ability to take advantage of the fact that it itself was a commodity. Yes, I understand you want to take this particular angle, but blacks are not the only ones that raise, if you want to say, quote unquote, criminals. And by the way, we didn't necessarily decide on George Floyd. And it didn't necessarily matter what George Floyd was. The entire point of the protests has little to nothing, believe it or not, to do with George Floyd's life. It has everything to do with George Floyd was murdered and the heinous way that he was murdered and the over amount of cop killings from the standpoint of African Americans, let alone the killings of African Americans just by random fucking civilians. Here's the catch. You brought up Jews. Israel right now has an open-air ghetto. That open-air ghetto, torture, abuse of children who are in the custody, meaning Palestinian children, and second class as an understatement in regards to the way the Palestinians are treated as more and more land is expropriated and as they are evicted viciously from their homes. There are plenty of Jews that support that. Look, your racism is somewhat offensive. Basically, you're looking at the world through a very specific lens, and that lens excludes crimes and horrors that were committed by whites, or for that matter, Jews, like right now. And look at the black community and give it a different lens. You're raising your criminals. Another point, it's not just quote unquote criminals. Martin Luther King was a criminal. And yes, we do raise him. He was put in jail often. I'm not making a comparison to say one person's life, meaning Floyd versus King. But I'm making this point about criminality. Malcolm X, criminal. Yes, we raise him. We give him accolades. There are plenty of others who have died swinging from trees that we don't necessarily know anything about, that people suffer in silence over. There are plenty of people who have died by cops that nobody cared about and suffered in silence. Breonna Taylor, shot in her house. She wasn't even safe at home. Attila Jefferson, shot through her window. She wasn't even safe at home. Those are also names that we raised up and that we are angry and indignant about. They weren't criminals. I'm making a point to you that it didn't matter what Floyd did. He didn't deserve to die that way. No, he wasn't necessarily the best version of himself that day. But that is utterly and entirely irrelevant to what the point is. Tamir Rice, get murders in 2 seconds. He wasn't a criminal. 2 seconds. Couldn't even get the opportunity to figure out what the fuck the cop was saying. If he said anything, he got out of the car and murdered him. The guy that got murdered in Walmart, immediate. This goes beyond one individual. If it was one person that got killed by the cop, and there was accountability, nobody would be on the streets. This is a pattern of abuse where people get off. They killed Trayvon Martin. He wasn't even a cop. I get that. But the justice system let him off when the prosecution barely put on a case, a wisp of a case. Prosecution can indict a ham sandwich. And for whatever reason, they had all sorts of pains in getting that asshole convicted. This is not an issue specific to Floyd. This is a pattern of abuse, a pattern of blacks being murdered by cops at a higher rate. That's what this is about. The indignity of what we saw, and how that was just kind of the culmination of several other killings. To coin this as if blacks are raising criminals, it's just flatly offensive. Your opinion is trash. This opinion, I'm sorry, is trash. Let's go to the next one. This one, she makes this case about George being a criminal. Let's hear this one. Let's see if there's any merit to this one.
Just getting his life together after, being released in 2014 following that incident. He was just getting his life together and moved and was going to start afresh. I'd like to believe all of those things, and there's a gap, and he never got in trouble for 5 years until this incident when the police were called on him again. But you are defying common sense to believe that this person suddenly became an exemplary character but happened to be high on fentanyl and methamphetamine and trying to use a fake bill to purchase something. And so, in my opinion, George Floyd was a criminal. He was a criminal. And just because he was a criminal doesn't mean he deserved to die at the knee of a police officer. But it does mean that I am not going to play a part of the broken black culture that always wants to martyr criminals, who wants to pretend they were these upstanding human beings that just wanted to help society, that just wanted to reach out and uplift society. And he has a rap sheet that is long, that is dangerous. He was an example of a violent criminal his entire life. Okay?
Well, again, perfunctory, didn't deserve to die, but he's a violent criminal, and blacks have this tendency to always raise up their criminals as if these were great upstanding men who were just trying to help society and help culture. I, honest to God, don't know who did that. Maybe I'm wrong on this. I do news all the time. Is it possible that I missed something? Yes. My understanding of this is that it is irrelevant. Everything you said is irrelevant. He could have peed in Chauvin's kids' cereal. The best thing that Chauvin could have done legally under the law, because we pay them not to abuse and destroy and beat up the civilization. We pay them to take people in custody where they can get prosecuted. Justice. We don't pay them to dispense maximum justice. That's not what we pay them for. The moment that you have the person subdued, it doesn't matter who that person was. It doesn't matter what that person's rap sheet. It doesn't matter what that person was trying to do or was going to do. He could have said, I am going to murder 50 cops. The moment that you have him subdued, that's it. You stop. You don't dispense additional justice. And if a man is pleading for his life, and not just pleading for his life, for fuck's sake, do you understand, can you fundamentally process, empathize to any degree what it is like, or what has to be happening to a man, and think of what it means to be a man in American society? Think of the qualities that your society attributes to men. You can look at them in the movies. What do men look like in movies when they're going to steel jaw, muscular chest, punching people in their face? That's the iconic image of men. Black men has taken that upper ante because of issues with slavery, where it's kind of, it's a knee-jerk or a counter response to this emasculation. And so in rap, you have this kind of hyper masculinity. I'm a man. And some of that stuff has to do with poverty and everything else, but whatever else. I'm making the point that from the standpoint of being a man, masculinity is part and parcel to it. What does it mean for a man, or what is happening to a man when he is crying for his dead mother? Understand what's happening. I'm making the point to you that what was taking place was utterly atrocious and vile. It did not matter what he was. It did not matter what his record was. I don't care what his record was. I don't care what he was doing 3 minutes before that happened. A man kneeled on a man's throat for nearly 9 minutes. That's literally what took place. That man just so happened to be black. 3 other officers watched as he did that. That man pleaded for his life. That man pleaded that I can't breathe. And that man begs for his mother. That's what I saw. Now, you may think that his record mattered more. I don't know why this bugs you so much, but you may think his record mattered more. To the millions of people who are protesting, what mattered more is that the cop dispensed maximum justice and did not care that he was screaming and begging for his life. That's what the people are out there for. The injustice of it all. The notion that policing can't be this way. If you want to give stats, again, cops kill nearly 1,000 times a year, more than 1,000 times a year. From 2013 to 2019, of those killings, 99% of the time, no charges were brought against the officers. That means that they're dispensing maximum justice, and you would have to believe that they are perfect at it. That's ludicrous. And the moment that you add in the skew that this tends to happen to blacks more, it becomes that much more disastrous, especially when there's a racial bias often attributed to when they would use force, even if you want to call it implicit. It's there. It's there. Your perfunctory, oh yeah, Chauvin shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have even put that in there. Why bother? Be honest. Just be honest. Basic point. I don't care what he was doing a minute before. I don't care one iota. The important part to this, the thing that everybody else gets, is that this shouldn't have happened. This was heinous. He sat on a man's throat. That man went responsive, and he stayed there for over another 2 minutes. Let's go to the last point. Stats. She wanted to give us some stats. Dangerous black people stats.
Who was shot and killed for trying to protect a pawn shop from looters, an upstanding citizen, an actual head of a police. He was the head of a police his entire life, 77 years old, did everything right? So we now have to kill upstanding black citizens because a non-upstanding black citizen, a career black criminal, died. Now, did he deserve to die in that manner? No. I can't say it enough. No, he didn't deserve to die in that manner. But I will be damned if the rest of us upstanding black citizens have to suffer because of this incident that rarely ever happens in America. So here are some numbers for you people that are still believing that police brutality is a real, racially motivated police brutality is a real thing. First and foremost, okay, you have a 25% higher chance as a violent white criminal of dying at the hands of a police officer than you do as a black criminal. Last year, a total of 9 unarmed black men were killed by police officers and 19 white men were killed by police officers. For those of you that aren't good at mathematics, right, you might be thinking, oh, but Candace, white people represent 60% of the population and black people represent just 13% of the population. It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent. It matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent. And unfortunately, black community commits a disproportionate amount of crimes compared to the white community. Let me tell you, 6% of the population, right? Black men, 6% of the population account for 44% of all murders in this country, according to 2018 statistics.
All right, stats. This is basically the argument that, look, it doesn't matter that cops kill blacks at a particular rate because blacks engage with the cops more. And so that somehow changes the metrics of this. Again, cops kill 1,000 times a year. And I agree, every time you hear me give this stat, you hear me say blacks make up 13% of the population. And I think the number is like 23% in a sense of the number of people from the standpoint of African Americans that are killed by cops as opposed to the whole. And I often say this is not just a black issue. This is a cop issue because whites are also being killed. She brought up the person who was 77 years old who apparently got killed protecting a pawn shop. I don't want any innocent person killed. And I would wager to you that the overwhelming majority of blacks would say exactly the same thing. When you have a lot of people being killed and there seems to be little to no justice associated with it, very little accountability in the process, it is infinitely reasonable to get a reaction. It just is. Whatever you think of it is irrelevant. Right or wrong in this context doesn't exist. This is entirely cause and effect. And this cause and effect, you had some people who were violent. The majority weren't. And unfortunately, this person got injured. By the same token, this person also got injured. Right here. 75 years old. Was he also culpable? Are you going to blame black people for that one too? Are you going to blame black people for that one too? It sounds like you're bitching about the protests. And basically the protests are beautiful uprisings of people of all colors, of all sexual orientations, coming out, not because George Floyd was a virtuous human being per se, but more so because they are indignant and angry that the cops behave in this way. Who are you going to blame that one on? Is that also the fault of blacks? Blacks had protests because blacks had protests that white guy got hurt. You fundamentally miss, intentionally or otherwise, white people out there. Here's the reality of it. Right here. In 2019, data of police killings in the country compiled by Mapping Police Violence, black Americans were nearly 3 times more likely to die from police than white Americans. Other statistics show that black Americans were nearly 1 and 3.5 times more likely to be unarmed before their deaths. Here's another one. Minneapolis police use force against black people at a rate of 7 times. At a rate of 7 times. Police killings are the 6th leading cause of death among young men, the study shows. But no problem. No problem. No problem. Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here, folks. You realize that this argument that there's no issue here. That basically this is because of more representation of crime. You realize that also can be an argument for racial profiling. That could be because cops over-police communities of color, meaning blacks are 3 times more likely to be captured for a drug crime like marijuana or something to that effect than whites, despite the fact they use the drug at the same rate. I'm making a point that your argument here of overrepresentation doesn't quite get at what people are saying, and it doesn't necessarily, certainly doesn't take away from these stats, and in no way explains those stats, if you understand what I'm saying here. And the last one, the blacks and violent crime thing, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Meaning, you given these stats at the end are irrelevant. I mean, yes, I engage it because I kind of do want to point out it's nonsense, But more important than that, it's irrelevant. What you're saying here is utterly and entirely irrelevant. I don't know who you're shucking and jiving for in this. I don't even particularly care who you're shucking and jiving for in this. What this boils down to is a man was murdered by a cop. A man, just like many other men, who were murdered by cops. Many of these people get no reprieve, no justice in this process, which creates a righteous indignation and a righteous anger. That anger boiled over. That anger boiled over not because he lived a virtuous life, but because he was just so happened the person that those cops murdered. Your perfunctory, he shouldn't have did it, couched in this other thing, your perspective in this gets across, despite this perfunctory nonsense that you throw in here or there in order to kind of pad your ground, to give a safe space so people can't necessarily hit you on this. No, I'm hitting you on this. There is no safe space. There is no quarter in this nonsense. You choose your side. I don't necessarily mean to take it in those blunt, bush-like terms, but you are literally making a video, 18 minutes or so, denigrating the character of a man because there are protests in the millions out there, not because of him living a virtuous life, but because he got killed in the first place. You understand that the dispensation of force should be measured and relative to what you need to take that person in. And you have to act rationally in dispensing that force. We give cops a massive amount of authority. And with that needs to also come a massive amount of responsibility and consequences when that is abused. In this case, he was subdued. He was caught. He wasn't fighting. And he remained on his throat in this kind of, I don't care about your life. I don't care about your pleas. I don't care about you calling for your dead mom. I am going to keep my knee here until you stop moving. And then even after you become unresponsible, I'm going to keep it there. And the issue becomes, if he was white, would they have done that? Some people may say yes. Some people may say no. But I do think me asking that question, many people will, there will be a lot of people who say, no, he wouldn't have done that if he was white. Which is the issue, and it's the problem. I would make the argument that the issue is the way cops do copping in general, not specifically from blacks, but in general. Like I said, the majority of people who are killed are white, despite the disproportionate nature from the standpoint of blacks. We have an issue with policing here. That's what Floyd is about. That's what those protests is about, not the individual character of a person who is just a human being. The last point. If you want to make a video that brings into focus the argument of, look, this thing that took place needs to go beyond Floyd and it needs to go to impoverished communities. Well, that I can get behind. That I can even give some level of credence to as have legitimacy in more poverty, more crime. It's a direct statistical relationship, even though it's not necessarily determinative. More disease or more illness from a standpoint in the black communities. All of those things are things where I could get around, I could get behind you on as a way of talking about this issue that go beyond just the death and the murder of Floyd. There are larger issues in the black community than cops. Health, for example, the eviction apocalypse, the 44 million people that lost their jobs, a large proportion of those are black because of the service job and the service industries. Those are things we could talk about. But this shitting on Floyd, it just seems to be provocative just for the sake of being provocative. Again, I don't know the shit-eating job or advertisement that you accepted and how much that shit-eating job from that advertisement that you accepted pays. I hope it pays well. This is a disgusting video that you've made. Like, share, and subscribe. Peter version 1, Jamal, good news, work insomniac. If she's upstanding, I'm glad I am with bottom. And that's the other part, right? Where she says, I'm upstanding. According to who? According to who? Is your upstanding measure is just, I haven't run afoul of the law? My measure is a little higher than that. A little higher. Like, share,